Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Sagrannus Gaming. This is our inaugural broadcast, and we're going to be looking at Endless Legend. Now, what is Endless Legend? Endless Legend is a turn-based 4X strategy by the French developer Amplitude Studios. Now, it's been built in the Unity engine and was released last year in September. As you may well be aware, it was a very successful game critically, receiving quite a few Game of the Years, and has been genuinely quite popular with the playing community as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new game, and we're going to have a quick little look at how the game starts off and the factions and that kind of thing, and then we're going to skip ahead in the last 5 minutes or so to have a look at what the later game is like. So let's jump into a new game. Now, this is a fantasy setting, so you are going to, of course, see quite a number of interesting and varied factions. In that way, it does differ from things like Sid Meier's Civilization 5, in that you're not just playing the same race with slightly different features, you're playing very different races, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, which adds a little bit of extra complexity to the gameplay, which is great. So we're actually going to kick off with a Draken culture. Now, this game is very, very strong on the lore. It tells you about its races. It even has write-ups on resources on the map. So we're just going to grab the Draken. Basic difficulty, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we've got world shape here. So we're going to go for 4 continents, and you can choose what the world is like. I'm going to go with the chaotic one in a temperate climate with... Let's go for some mountainous topography, and we're going to just jump in as quickly as we can and see how we go from there. Even the loading screens, there's quite a variety of art backdrops, as it were, for the loading screens, which is always nice. Each loading screen has a little tip there, which can often be quite useful in assisting the player, which is an issue that we will actually talk about a little bit later on as well. So there is an intro video. We're going to skip it just to save some time and so I don't spoil too much for those of you who haven't played the game. Okay, so at the start of each match, you start with an army that contains 2 units of soldiers, your hero, and a settler. And this is the world. Now, obviously they are randomly generated worlds, just as in most 4Xs, and let's just have a look at the art style. It is something special, without a doubt. It's a very interesting art style, it's very attractive, and really takes advantage of what the Unity engine is capable of in skilled hands. So all of these things here, you've got luxury resources here, and as I said, you've got plenty of write-up on them, as well as information on what effect they do have on everything. Then you have anomalies. Now, anomalies are a nice little addition, in that anomalies are variations in the terrain that have specific effects. You can't build any sort of special building on them, but they change how different provinces might serve your cities, and also they help determine where you're going to build your city, because the cities obviously take advantage of the resources around them and are influenced by what is there. So let's found a city. So as you can see, you've got 3 different things, and actually in some cases 4, different things that affect the tiles. You have the wheat, which is obviously food. So you get a huge bonus to food on some of the tiles here. Then the blue is research production, the red is infrastructure or industry production, and then as you can see down here, the purple is influence production. Now, influence is a 4th production resource which starts to have a big effect on the game later on. So let's actually, I'm going to get a good view, so I'm going to whack my city up here. Now, early in the game, there's an immediate thing that you notice. Now, if you've played a lot of 4X, so especially turn-based, Sid Meier's Civ 5, Galactic Civilizations 3 in particular, especially the recent ones, there's this decision by the developers to really nag players, and it can be good, it can be bad, with if you try to end your turn without finishing moves, enacting research, enacting building, etc., etc., the game will actually pull you up and go, oh, hold on, you haven't done this yet. Now, with the exception of a few things, such as Empire Planes, this game doesn't do this. I could easily skip ahead and go to the next turn without sending my troops anywhere further, selecting any research to perform or constructions to undertake. And that can be a problem, especially when you're managing the bigger empire later in the game, because as you can imagine, it's going to start to get a bit tricky if you're not basically utilizing your empire to its fullest extent. So up here is our little control bar, and let's select ourselves some research. So I always like to focus on getting proper research undergoing as soon as possible, and boosting as much as possible, because research plays a big part in the game. There are issues with the research system. It's not the most intuitive tech tree, and also often you don't really feel the effects of some of the things, so you often avoid researching things that might have an effect later down the track, but you just don't see the point. If you scroll through Steam reviews, for example, one of the big beefs is actually the research screen, and I do think it could have been done better, perhaps more in the vein of some other 4X games, such as Galactic Civilizations, which is quite intuitive and a bit clearer. I mean, there is a write-up on what it does, but it's still not the clearest, almost intuitive system. Now, we'll send our troops off over here and select some buildings. So we'll start with an Empire Mint, so get some more money coming in. Money is called dust in this game, but really it functions as any currency in any game, other than the fact that within the lore of the game, dust is not only money, but it's used for magic and things like that as well, and even producing equipment. Okay, so let's just end the turn now. So here's one of the big additions to the 4X formula, in that there's quite a strong focus on quests and questing within the game. Each faction has a main storyline quest, which also actually helps pace the development of your empire and how you play the game, which can be quite handy, especially for new players, and also gets you to sort of try different elements of the game, and that's quite good. You also get random quests from sites like ruins and from minor factions, and I think that's one of the big drawcards of this game. I'll talk about this a bit later on in my conclusions, but questing adds something to this formula which really boosts the game quality-wise. So let's see if we get some quests from here. We may not, it's entirely our own. Thankfully, just like that, we have a new quest. And the way quests work is you've got a nice little write-up here, a summary of the write-up there, in case you don't feel like writing it, because some of these write-ups can be very long, as you might have seen with the previous main quest, and then it actually tells you the objective. So this one's not too bad. We'll actually look at production of things and altering the production of cities in the latter half of the video, where we look at the more built-up empire, just because it's easier to play around with those things once the empire's definitely up and running. But before we wrap up this part of the video with the beginning, which I've shown you, enough that you have an idea of how the startup works, I will just touch on a few little things, pluses and minuses as it were. The resource system is fairly standard for 4X, so that's good. So you've got strategic resources, which are used to build things, train soldiers, and supply equipment for heroes. Luxury resources, which have more of a boosting effect on cities, and also relevant within quests and trading. Nice features I like. The graphics are stunning. I mean, they're not going to push a system to its limit. It's definitely not making my system struggle whatsoever. But they still have a nice crisp look and are quite good looking. And I do love the anomaly system. The anomaly system doesn't just make the world look better, it also changes the gameplay a little bit, because obviously placing your city more intelligently within the terrain is going to benefit you greatly. And what I'm going to do for the latter bit is I'm going to place some cities in really silly places and in really good places. And at the same time, we'll also look at the province system and assimilation systems and just sort of show you what the game really does have to offer. Okay, so now let's travel forward in time, shall we? Alright, and we're back just for a few moments. So we've struck onto one of the biggest bugbears, for me anyway, in this game. And that is the RNG element of the quests. Now, as you can see here, I've just received a quest. And it is just a random quest found in some ruins. Now, the ruins, as you saw just before, are RNG. They will give you money, items, or a quest. And it's entirely up to the game what you get. Now, this may simply be a result of the RNG, but the quests that can be given are actually quite ridiculous. Because in this game, water is a barrier, and until you've reached the point where your troops can embark upon water, you cannot cross it. But you can be given a quest with a time limit that requires you to cross the water. In this case, I've been given this new quest, A Relic of the Past. Now, this is one you see fairly often. You go to one set of ruins and they say go to another set of ruins and search them within 5 turns. Now, I can click show location and it tells me where I'm supposed to go just to help players, know where to go, which is a nice feature, but bam, that's where I need to be. But I'm here. Now, I'm not certain, but given that we've set it up on continents, I would put a fairly reasonable wager that there's water all the way through here, which means I can't get there, which means I've been given a quest which is impossible. Now, I don't object to difficult quests being assigned. Not at all. I think that's a fantastic thing. What I do object to is being given a quest that is outright impossible. I'm not a game developer, but I would assume that it's possible to code the game so it doesn't give you quests that are impossible to complete, because it does potentially upset players when the game seems to be playing it by its own rules and really flipping off the player as it walks past, going, well, you can't do this, but I'm going to tell you that you should try to do it anyway. Because those sort of quests actually often have quite powerful rewards, and once you're aware of that, it can be quite annoying. And it does happen with fairly high frequencies, in that I have tested this. I've launched 10 games, and within the first 20 turns of each of these games, and I might just be being unlucky here, but within the first 20 turns of each of these new games, I have received that quest to go onto another continent within 5 turns to get this, and of course I have not been able to do that. And that is a pain, because once you've searched a ruin, unless it's reactivated by a quest, that ruin is done. You can never go there again. Its benefits have been reaped. And it's just one of those little needles, little flaws into the game that can be really upsetting over an extended period of time, especially if you're playing lots of games, because you really want to actually be able to do the quest you're given. You don't want to get a quest and basically know from the outset you're never going to finish it, and more to the point, you're going to fail it. It's not like in other games where you're given a quest that you won't be able to complete for a long time because you're not a high enough level or you don't have the tech. And this game does have missions that you get early on that won't be finishable for the next 100 turns, and that's alright. But it's when you get given a quest you're going to fail. That's when you run into some problems, and you do start to feel like the game isn't balanced or quite as carefully prepared as you'd hope. Alright, moving on. Okay, so earlier I mentioned the influence system and empire plans. This is something that you don't see in every single 4X for certain, and probably this is the most obvious implementation of it I've ever seen. And I actually quite like it. It adds an extra level to the gameplay and to the feeling of having a whole empire. Now, it's only turn 20 and I only have one city, but later on it is much more effective because you might be impacting on dozens of cities potentially. So what is it? Influence is a resource that you earn from producing it within your city. Each city can produce varying amounts depending on what buildings it has and who's assigned where. I will go into assigning population later on, but I'll briefly surmise that you can assign different numbers of people to different tasks within the city to produce different key resources for use in the empire. Influence has two main uses. It can be used in empire plans and it can be used for the assimilation of other factions. Assimilation of other factions we'll look at later on. For now, we're going to look at empire plans. Now, the empire plan is one of the only things that pops up that will not let you end the turn until you've done something with it. As you can see here, it's the red box in the bottom right. So, here's your empire plan. Now, you have to spend influence points to get anything, and as you go through the eras, which is something I'll talk about in more detail in a little bit, you unlock new plans. You have 4 types: military, science and industry, empire and expansion, and economy and population. And these can make or break your game, because if you need a particular resource, empire plans can give it to you, and if you don't assign your empire plan points properly, you can end up regretting it. Now, I'm a research buff, and I only have enough influence points to really get one of these elements. So I'm going to pull this one out here to get 20 points. Now, as you can see, as you pull out further, it costs you more and you unlock new things. I only want my plus 20% research on cities, which will actually be quite a boost for me at present. Obviously, if you've got lots of points, you can pull out all the way out here, and as you unlock more things, go even further. Every era, things start to increase in costs, so that is something to keep in mind, and you do need to keep those influence points for other things. Okay, so those are your eras. Population management. This is similar, at least in some forms, to specialist management and population management in Civ 5, in which you would assign the population to various roles to do certain things. Admittedly, in Civ 5 it was more about assigning the entire city to perform certain roles, though you could get a bit more hands-on with moving things around tiles. Now here instead you have the city info box. From a starting point, you start with one population member, and everyone simply, when they're born, goes and becomes another farmer. However, once your population is built up, you are going to want to take something out, because you don't just want to keep growing your population, you want to actually utilize it as well. Use your human resources. Now in this case, I've actually moved 3 citizens across into the research tree. That's because this city has quite a strong research focus. It's got plenty of buildings, and the tiles around it, as you can see, all have research bonuses. So there's actually quite a benefit in that. I also have a builder here which boosts production, so for every citizen who is working in the research sector, I get plus 9 to my research, thus resulting in quite a huge boost. And different cities will have different bonuses, and you'll move things around to make sure you have enough money for the empire, or you'll have enough influence building up so that you can assimilate things. So we'll move on to assimilation next. Alright, so assimilation is another interesting little twist on the forex strategy system for this game. Assimilation relates to the minor factions within the game. Now you can get minor factions on side in 3 different ways. You can destroy their settlements, this is one of them there, and then rebuild it. You can bribe them to take your side, or you can parlay and therefore complete a quest or 2 for them to get them to change sides. In this case, I wiped them out and have rebuilt their settlement, and thus that means they can be assimilated into the empire. And this is where you use the influence points other than for the empire plan. And so here you earn slots for assimilated factions, and you have to conquer them. So I've only got 1 available, so I'll pick them. Now it'll only cost me 30. It will only cost me 30 influence points to assimilate. Now each minor faction adds different bonuses. As you can see here, I get bonus movement for every single one of this faction's villages that's been pacified and therefore made part of my empire. Further, I can also build their 1 unit. As I'll talk about later on, this seems really useful until you realise that they're only good if you need them for quests, because the rest of the time your imperial units tend to be better. And so I'll assimilate them and they'll become part of the empire, and I get these bonuses. Now you can always remove them if you want to replace them with someone else and you don't have new slots, which is also quite nice. But it's just an interesting element. It's not a huge element, but it adds that extra feeling of actually governing an empire that's expanding and absorbing other cultures, and it's something that you don't see very often in other games, and that's quite excellent as well. So I definitely think that's a good addition to this game, and in addition to the 4X strategy system. We'll move on again and see what happens a bit later in the game. Alright, so we've stepped forward in time quite a bit now. So we're at turn 144, so it's probably been about an hour and a bit since I finished the last segment. So let's just have a look at what's changed. So, I now have 3 cities. This is the most recent, and a few other things. I've got roads now. Now roads need research, obviously, and they speed up movement between cities, and I've advanced the main quest a bit. I'm now in a new era. I'm currently in the 3rd era. Now, eras unlock basically these tiers of research, and these are from Guardians, the DLC. These sort of legendary achievements, and each era you unlock the new ones that you can get access to. There's an economic one, sort of a leader one, and a construction one. And honestly, this is where we get to one of the big things. If you look up this game, you'll probably find people complaining about the AI, and it's kind of fair enough. In-game, you can usually whoop the AI in battle, because they tend to build the same army over and over again. So if a faction starts and they decide to build an army, a couple of tier 1s and a couple of tier 2, that's the only army they're going to build. Hopefully it does. This is something that will be fixed. It is a complaint I've seen quite often. To be honest, it doesn't faze me too much, but it is kind of annoying because it often limits the amount of challenge you face. The other thing is that despite this sort of ineptitude from the AI, it will generally beat you to these legendary objectives. And sometimes you sort of wonder why, because you can be boosting your research as hard as you can and making sure to research all of the things you need to be able to complete these, the legendary achievements, as quickly as possible, and you'll find that quite often the AI will beat you. As you can see here, I haven't actually got a single legendary. The red guys have taken the majority of them, and the blue guys have taken 1. I mean, it's not a game breaker for me, but it is one of those things where if you're playing against the AI, you are going to get pinged off by that. I won't lie about that. So we'll keep playing and just see what else happens. Now, I've unlocked a lot of new legendary resources and new strategic resources. Sorry, not legendary resources, luxury resources. And so here you can see I've got adamantium that I'm going to be mining, titanium, which is one of the basic resources, titan bones is a luxury resource, and all of these things affect the gameplay in various ways, unlocking new equipment and such like. So let's look at the heroes. Now, I've just kept the basic hero for the game, for this faction. Now, each faction has one sort of starting hero that's a standard type, and as you progress through the game, you can actually hire mercenary heroes, and I'll show you that screen in just a little bit. But first, let's look at what's called the Academy. Here you can look at your heroes and assign them to armies and cities, and they can perform various roles, and you can even sell your heroes. But before we look at the marketplace for heroes, we'll look at Inspect. Now, in hero inspection, you get 2 things. You've got the write-up about the character, which they have a lot of lore, which is both nice and sort of pointless because you do tend to just not bother reading it after a while. It tells you what class of hero they have, so this one's a support hero, how much XP they have, their health level, how much they cost to run, and all of their stats. Now, he's just using the basic equipment, but we can change that. So I've unlocked tier 3 equipment, and I have 3 choices at present. I can make him a titanium weapon, a glass steel weapon, or an iron weapon. Now, each weapon type has a different effect. So at the moment he is wielding an iron staff, it has certain effects. So you've got a certain amount of damage, how much it can also buff health. Also, most weapons have a special effect. This one slows down enemies. But if we have a look through, I could look at this one, I mean that's a huge improvement. And this one, they're quite similar because they're both wands. Quarterstaves, scepters, mage wands, and each have sort of different types of effects that they can put out on various people. So I'm not particularly fond of slowdown, to be honest. So we're actually going to try this titanium one. And it does, the weapons do change in appearance. Unfortunately, armor does not. So let's go to armor. And, well, the best option is going to be the tier 3 iron. So we'll equip that. And we'll look at these. Now, these are accessories, and they're purely buffing. So let's have a look. Well, that's improved movement's always good. And I'll probably have to go for the iron again, because I haven't researched as much as I would have liked. And as you notice, his armour doesn't change, which is a bit of a shame. It would have been nice to see that, but that's an aesthetic preference, and it's not going to kill the game if you don't have the ability to cosmetically alter your heroes beyond their weapon. Now let's go back and inspect after we've bought him all that stuff. Go to the skill tree now. All heroes have these 3 branches: class, common, and faction. And as you can imagine, common are the same, or basically the same skills that are available to everyone. Faction are dependent on what faction you are, and class depends on what class. It's fairly straightforward. And so you go through, and each time you level up, you choose a new one and apply it. Now with leveling up, one feature I do like is that battle isn't the only way to get experience. Experience builds up just by being alive, and so your heroes will and units will tick over as they level up, which is quite handy. Now let's look at the marketplace. So this actually changes. As you can see, there's sort of set heroes here that will just be there constantly for you to get. But you also have exclusive heroes. There's a sort of cycle of more powerful heroes, sometimes just a bit different. And so that way you can get heroes from every race and every class, which is quite handy if you have a particular goal in mind for a particular force or city. And in the marketplace you can also buy luxury resources and things like that. So what I'm actually trying to do is get us to winter, because that's a factor I would really like to talk about, and hopefully the game will play ball with me, because the seasons system is quite an interesting one in this game, in that it's not on a set rotation so much as other games that do have seasons, and I know a lot actually don't have seasons at all. But seasons do have an impact on this game, with winter decreasing production, visibility, and movement, to name a few of the effects that they have. Now hopefully we'll actually get to show you a battle as well, because those guys are sneaking up on my capital. Now the season system works by counting down to a period, but instead of just going, you're going to have 4 turns, for example, 4 turns of summer, 4 turns of winter, 4 turns of summer. What happens is, if you have a look down here in the bottom right, it'll tell you what season you're currently in. The current season is summer. It is the best season for life, movement, and visibility. Isn't that lovely? Then you have this here, and that's the countdown to your other season. And it has a little number next to it. For mine, it says 6 to 26. So that means in a minimum of 6 turns and a maximum of 26 turns, the season will change to winter. Now, that's quite cool, because it means you can't plan perfectly for when the seasons will change. And so you have to adapt your gameplay style a little bit to deal with the changes in circumstances you're facing when you go into a different season. Moreover, as the game progresses, as a sort of balancing element to the game, you do in fact find that winters get longer and summers get shorter, thus just a little bit increasing the challenge of the game. Now, as you've noticed, I'm not having any real difficulty in actually dealing with the controls. But I will talk about them a bit more in my conclusion, because it is important to understand that I do have quite a lot of experience with 4X games, and that gives me sort of an advantage here. Now, we're going into a battle. You can always choose sort of whether you're going to take part, just watch, or just let them resolve it automatically like most 4X games, which is nice. You can also choose your global strategy, so typically only affects if you're actually spectating. Now, I've got reinforcements from the city. I can actually choose whether or not they deploy with me, which is quite handy in case you want to keep them in reserve, or you're confident your army will walk all over them. Now, I do have a few little... I both love and hate the combat system, though both of those are extreme. It's a perfectly competent combat system, and in fact more interesting than something like Galactic Civilizations 3, in that that's a spectator combat system essentially, or Civilizations 5, which is just an animation. You do actually have to involve yourself with a bit of strategy, and the world itself plays a part, because the battle takes place, as you can see, on a section of the world, and terrain actually affects where your guys can move. And of course, if you have flying units, which I believe I do, yep, I have flying units, they can ignore certain elements of terrain such as cliffs, whereas other units have to obey them. So you can choose where your units start, and honestly there's not much more to it. So I tell them I'm ready. Now you assign their targeting, so you tell them who they're aiming for. You can also, well, that's all you can do. You can't actually tell them to move anywhere, which I'm not too fond of because it limits the strategy. Basically you're saying hit them or hit them, but assigning the right target can be quite important. So we'll launch, everyone's attacking one unit. So that's my hero firing there. Now there's a bit of a rock, paper, scissors system that goes on here, and certain units are obviously better. As you can see on both sides, it shows the units that are fighting and the various skills. As you can see, he can't actually get a direct attack position because flying units can't attack over cliffs, so they're moving around. There's something I'll draw your attention to while these animations play out, because this is the downside of the combat system. You do just have to wait for things to roll out. There's no control beyond assigning targets or not, and telling support units to buff or attack. It's the fact that combat has 6 phases. That is 6 turns, essentially. Which means you can be winning the battle, but if it gets to 6 turns, no matter how close you are to winning, that match is a draw. And I mean, yes, you can just go back and start and fight them again with the changed figures from the previous fight, but it's very limiting, especially as you get into bigger battles, because 6 turns sometimes isn't enough when you've got tough heroes or high damage heroes fighting high tank heroes, and it might take time to wear down an enemy. And especially, I mean, look at the number of units that we've actually got on the field. I mean, I've deployed 8 units against their 4, but it still takes, the turn takes time, and getting troops in position to actually do things takes time. Every unit gets to counter the first attack against them. Obviously different units have variations on this, whether they can counter more often or whether their attacks can't be countered, but essentially it's fairly basic. It's not a complex combat system. It's a little bit more involved than some 4X systems. And as you can see here, that green arrow means my hero is going to buff in some way the other guy. Now let's see what his buff is. The interesting element, I think, in the combat really for this game is actually the fact that each faction's soldiers are very different, and also once you've assimilated a faction within your empire, you can then train their units. However, for the vast majority of these, the minor faction units are significantly weaker than the units that you get to deploy. And so really I've only ever carried them in my army when it's been a requirement in a quest to have X number of X factions units. It's a nice touch, but because of the disparity between Empire units and minor faction units, you just very rarely actually see the point in the extra effort of raising those special troops. Now while this battle pans out, I will actually get on with concluding a few things. The art style is one of the big outstanding elements of this game. It's a very, very good looking game. It doesn't really make any system that I use labour at all. It's very attractive, it's very variable, especially when you're running a chaotic mountainous map like I am. So you've got snowy regions, and for instance you've got all these special elements here that you can see. I like the way that the map changes in battle, so it just goes to a sort of a hand-drawn aesthetic rather than the 3D aesthetic, which means that nothing really gets in the way of the battle visually. I like that each faction has its own sort of architecture, and it's very clearly differentiated. So I'm playing the Dragon faction, so on their buildings they actually often have dragons. That's just a resource gathering point here. This is a watchtower. Now watchtowers you unlock in the second period and can only be built on watchtower ruins, and each faction's watchtower obviously looks a bit different. Mine sticking to the aesthetic of the dragon, and that's great. I do really think that that's good. So both aesthetically and graphically it's quite pleasing. Now why do I say aesthetically and graphically? Because aesthetically it's lovely design, but a lot of games can have a lovely aesthetic design but not do well graphically because lower settings make it look a bit crappy. But I've sort of played with this and gone through from low to ultra looking at the graphics, and even on low it's still got that charm. It's not as polished and you haven't got all the little special effects that are looking quite as nice, but it holds together and has that charm, which is great. Okay, so we were literally in the last phase there when I won that battle, so I'm glad that we actually got to win. And then it just gives you a post summary. It's very basic. really. Okay, we're probably not going to get to winter, unfortunately, but I think I've explained it well enough that you understand. Obviously, the map changes and you get lots more snow and you get blizzard winds blowing across the screen. But other than that, it's really the gameplay mechanics I've already described. The music in the game, it isn't really noticeable. It's nice enough that it doesn't bug you, but it's nothing outstanding as a soundtrack. Now, the intuitiveness of this game. As I said, I'm a fairly regular player of 4X games, which means most 4X games I can sit down and pick up with few difficulties. This game is one of them. There were a few little things I had to work out because it is a slightly different layout to what you'd expect from playing more well-known 4Xs. But, you know, it's a 4X strategy turn-based game, and as such, I was able to pick it up. However, the fact that it probably doesn't hold your hand as much as other 4Xs, and that a few things are in slightly different places to what you'd expect, means that someone who's new to the genre may have a little bit of trouble picking it up, but I honestly think an hour or two and they're going to be just as competent as anyone else. 4X games have a tendency to be quite logical in their layout, which is good, and I dare say that Amplitude actually did quite a bit of testing to make sure it really sat well, and that was one of the advantages I think they had in running it early access. Not that I'm the biggest fan of early access systems, but I think they did benefit from doing it with this game, and even when they launched in early access, it did feel quite polished. As to longevity of playing this game, I hate to say it, but despite the diversity offered by all of the different elements I've talked about, the different factions, the different maps and everything, the actual end goal is fairly a linear one. You don't have as much choice as you find in big games like Civ 5, and as such, I don't play this anywhere near as much, despite the fact that I think it's much better looking than Civ 5 and has much more interesting lore than Civ 5. It just doesn't have that replayability factor. It's still plenty, you can still get plenty of replayability, but not as much as perhaps I would have liked, to be honest. But that said, you're still going to get dozens of hours of fun out of this game if you're a 4X fan, which I think is the important thing, and it does look like they've got a plan for more content. Obviously the Guardians DLC adds a bit more, though it's not as immediately realised as other games DLC are. One other thing is diplomacy. Now, diplomacy is quite important in 4X, and diplomacy in this is not a strong point. This is your diplomacy screen, and you click on a faction, and I mean, it has improved from where it was originally, but it's a fairly basic one, and honestly I very rarely use it because honestly you're probably just going to end up fighting and killing everyone anyway with little trouble because of the aforementioned foibles with the AI that have been glossed by others as well. However, my overall impressions are as follows. This game is very good looking, very solidly built. I've not encountered any game-breaking bugs or glitches at all, which is unfortunately a very rare thing in the current climate of the industry. So it's very playable, very fun, it's very pretty, there's lots of lovely lore, especially if you like reading, that's great. It does add a bit of a twist to the 4X strategy. I'm not going to go out and say, oh, look at this groundbreaking game, because it's not groundbreaking. It brings a few new ideas to the table, quite a few of which I think should be seriously looked at by competitors in the industry and adopted or something along those lines, because 4X strategy is a great genre, but it can get very stale very quickly because it relies so much on that one more turn element, and that this game does have it. It does have that, oh, I just want to play another turn, I just want to build one more thing, or go to just one of those. And I find, actually for me, one of the biggest pleasures of this game is exploring the map, because it really is. You get a very diverse looking world, it's very different every time, and it is just gorgeous to look at. It's a beautiful art style, and I think that's one of the biggest selling points, is that and the quest system, which is another thing that makes it stand out from the crowd. I mean, other 4Xs have quest systems. Elemental by Stardock is one that definitely springs to mind, though as some of you may be aware, Elemental itself did not have the happiest launch, and they actually basically remade the game and issued it free to anyone who had registered their copy of the original game. So thankfully this game wasn't plagued by that, in that Endless Legend did have a stable launch and had a very successful early access period as well. Honestly, if you're looking for a 4X game and you're sick of Civ 5, sick of Cal Civ, I don't know why you would be, but if you are, or you're looking for more of a fantasy setting, then I seriously think that this is worth a look. It's a good game. I don't think it's a perfect game or a brilliant game even, but it's a solid game that will give you plenty of hours of fun, and it's an enjoyable world, and it's a developer who clearly takes a lot of pride in that work, and that's something that's great to see in the current climate of the industry. I don't give ratings. I don't really like ratings, so we'll just settle for it's a good game, and if you're looking for Fantasy 4X, definitely give it a go. It's available on Steam and I'm sure in various other outlets. Okay, I've been Sagrannus on the inaugural edition of Sagrannus Gaming, and I hope that you'll continue to watch. Thanks.